Somewhere in New York. I forgot the name of the school.
Recording? Okay. Good evening. My name is Don McWilliams. I'm going to be chairing the meeting tonight of the September 10th Environmental Board meeting. It's a hybrid meeting, so for those of you in the room, board members, if you have questions, please do your sign up. For those of you online, I don't see anybody online yet. Just raise your hand. Next, we had minutes attached to this. They were short. Is there any changes to the minutes? I stepped the take us through attendance.
Sure.
Yeah,
We have a lot of folks on wonderful vacations or getting married, so we have a very small group today. I'll just go through those that are present and then go through the excused absences. Tommy Anderson,
Here.
Raj Kapandi,
Here,
skipped. Tommy Devier,
Here.
Karen Pan. Mina June is possibly joining us online. Don McWilliams.
Here.
And John Smith.
Here.
And then for excused absences, we have Nancy Davidson, Dixie Bear, Alex Lee Tigner, Ann Newcomb, and Keith Gonzalez. But we do have quorum, and John will be sitting in as a regular member tonight.
Hearing no changes to the minutes, probably approved. What comments? Want to comment tonight?
I would love to.
Is it 5 minutes now?
Yes. Yeah, if you would. Of course. And why don't you come up here and just, yeah, then I can pick you up better. Right there is a good place.
Sure.
Is this good?
Yep.
Super. All right. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad for all of you being on the environmental board. And my name is Ann Fletcher, and I'm a 37-year resident of Issaquah, and I work with the People for Climate Action group, and I'm in lead the Issaquah chapter. And just for those of you that don't know, the PCA, which is the acronym for People for Climate Action, is a nonprofit organization, and it's a coalition of 13 city chapters in King County. And our purpose is to work with the local governments to meet the state, county, and city goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Big goal. But we're all just citizens, ordinary citizens like you, with various professions and backgrounds. And our experiences and investigation have just led us to feel really strongly about this and be willing to put in time and effort on it. Since I just have a little bit of background for you, a little context. PCA started in 2015, and we have provided information and advocacy to our local and regional elected officials and relevant staff members and our communities. We advocated for the establishment of an environmental board in Issaquah. And we collaborated with the city on 2 community climate convenings, which were wonderful. Got input from all the community before the first climate action plan was established. We participate in the annual sustainability fairs, and occasionally we provide letters of support for city grant applications, just a variety of things, whatever we can do to help. We have contributed to the passage and implementation of the current climate action plan for the city. We are especially focused on the variety of ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have witnessed over this last 5 years, our cities and our counties strive very hard to implement the plans that were set out. And our greenhouse gas inventories, unfortunately, are showing that we are not reducing our emissions at all, or not enough for sure. And so this is based on our regular inventories, and We realized we have a lot of hindrances, a lot of challenges. We have systems in our country that aren't set up. Our society is not set up. There's conflicts in our country, and we have unprecedented growth in our area. We have a lot of factors, but it's still possible to do this with a more collaborative approach. So our idea is to collaborate across all levels of government and to kind of take a fresh approach. The King County is doing an update on their plan as well. So looking at that, they are scaling up and accelerating. That's what the head of the climate office told me when I met with her last month. It was scale up and accelerate. That was their mandate from the county. And they know that increasing collaboration with them, the cities, the community is going to be a key to success. So currently, Issaquah and many other cities are also updating the climate action plans, and I know you're involved in that. So I wanted to be following that. And I think this is a great opportunity to do a lot of good things in the plan. And there are many, many good things in the plan, but in particular, our focus is to significantly reduce emissions within the next 5 years. And so to that end, coming to my final point here, the PCA created a task force and spent about 5 months researching and identifying 12 critical actions that our local governments can implement that would be the most crucial to getting this to happen. And they're not always the easiest ones. But most of our emissions are from buildings and transportation. So 5 of the actions focus on a smooth transition to clean energy buildings. And 5 actions work similarly with transportation. And 2 of the actions are overarching and foundational to all the other things happening. And those 2 are having sufficient dedicated financial resources to do these things. And the other is community education and involvement. So because all these actions kind of work together and they accrue incrementally over time, it's really important for government to start on all of them as soon as possible to get the necessary emissions reductions over time. So Stacy and David can send this PCA report to you. I sent it to them. I do suggest that you not be overwhelmed by it because you know how these things are, but kind of look at read the introduction and look at the table of contents just to get the idea of what are the actions and see how they fit with, and of course, Stacy and David have already read it and they are familiar and can answer questions, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I do hope to come back sometime and discuss a little bit further with you in a way that would work out with the board, what these might be and how they might fit into Issaquah's climate action plan. So thank you. Okay.
We have 3 topics tonight: municipal building decarbonization and fuel transition assessment. That's informational only. And a report on sustainable building and infrastructure policy originally that we were going to take action now because of the small group. Stacy's asked that we just kind of reserve it for comment tonight, take action another time. And then the third thing is climate action plan update with progress next steps. So David's going to start us off.
Yes. So I have the first 2 topics. It is going to be a pretty deep dive into municipal work and municipal buildings for my presentations today. So for this first presentation, this one is informational only. I'm going to ask that we save questions until the end. I'll get through it. There is a lot of information and details in it, but at the end we can kind of go through all questions. For the next presentation about the sustainable building and infrastructure policy, I'm happy to take questions as we go. So the municipal building decarbonization assessment was passed in early 2024. And we were able to hire a consultant. We worked with McDonald Miller for the actual work, and that work was completed throughout most of 2024. In early 2025, the report was turned over to city staff. We did city staff assessment of the information of the report. And then we also worked, before bringing it back to the environmental board and city council, we worked very hard to incorporate the results of that assessment and the results of that staff assessment into our capital improvement plan. And so that's one of the reasons why it's coming to you at this point. We were able to get a lot of information and projects into that plan, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later today. And then I'll also note that this is a presentation to the environmental board today, and I'll be going to city council to present roughly the same slides on Monday. So as a little bit of background, Anne brought up our greenhouse gas inventory. This is actually an image of our 2022 municipal greenhouse government operations greenhouse gas inventory. And it might be familiar to folks who've been on the board for a little while and for a few years, or it might be new to those who have joined more recently. But this was actually the first inventory that the city has ever done that addressed greenhouse gas emissions associated with city operations. As a note, we are updating our greenhouse gas inventory for municipal operations now for the 2024 year. And we expect those results in early 2026, and that will be coming to the board early next year. But so the real focus of today's conversation on fuel transition assessment, which is what the report for this was called, is really on the natural gas use associated in city facilities, right? So you can see it is the largest chunk of our municipal greenhouse gas emissions. But this is where the bulk of the effort for the fuel transition assessment was looking at. What would it take to transition our natural gas equipment in city facilities and turn that over to electric equipment? There are a couple other areas where the assessment touches on. You'll see this in a little bit, but it also assessed renewable energy capacity of city facilities. It also looked at electrical capacity for EV charging at city facilities. And then I'll also note that it did cover all city-owned facilities, which includes leased buildings, which are not represented in the municipal operations greenhouse gas inventory. I can talk about that in a little bit. This again might be a familiar slide. I've shown this one in the past, but this is really just showing the multiple levels of facilities assessments that we've been doing along with the facilities team, and how these facilities assessments work together to help us understand our decarbonization pathways at city facilities. The biggest circle, the first thing we did was really, it's called benchmarking, which is really just getting an understanding of what is the energy use at our facilities. And where the fuel transition assessment is, it's kind of that smallest circle right now, but it's after we've done benchmarking, looked at the condition of our facilities, looked at our energy use and the opportunities to find energy efficiency. We went down to the fuel transition assessment, which was a deeper dive into what would it actually take to transition, again, off of natural gas equipment to electric equipment. There could be smaller circles in here because this assessment was a high-level look at 70 pieces of equipment across all of our city facilities. And a lot of that equipment transition will require some in-depth design, engineering analyses, et cetera, as we get into the actual work of implementing this plan. So the purpose of the assessment, the reason we really did this is there's a couple of reasons. One was to demonstrate city leadership in climate action. We want to make sure that we are leading by example. We're not just telling people to electrify their homes or to take climate action in their own personal lives, but the city really wants to demonstrate that we are a leader in this as well. We are advancing progress towards ICAP targets. Even though the city is a small percentage of citywide greenhouse gas emissions, everything that we can do to bring down our own greenhouse gas emissions helps us towards our city targets. And then the third bit is to help staff understand and get a sense around what is it actually going to take to implement efforts to electrify our city buildings and develop renewable energy projects. This project covered 23 city-owned facilities, and as I mentioned before, it did cover city facilities that are owned by the city, but operated by other parties or leased out. And for some of those facilities, they are the ones responsible, the leased entity is responsible for some of the equipment upgrades. So in those cases, this is to help us understand what are the opportunities when leases are renewed, what are the opportunities if for the leased agencies to think about when they do get to make changes to their to our facilities, etc. But we reviewed electrification of existing fossil fuel equipment. There was an assessment of facility electrical capacity. So is there electrical capacity to even consider electrifying our equipment? Doing a high-level solar analysis for every single facility that the city owns, and then also looking at opportunities for electric vehicle infrastructure. And then recommended actions, our consultant was able to take a look at all of these materials and look at it within the context of other facilities assessment we've done and make some recommendations around what are some higher and lower priority projects for us to consider. When we got the report from McDonald Miller, we did additional analysis on it. So I got to take all of the data, all of the information, and we were able to evaluate cost to impact ratios. So how much does a project cost compared to how much natural gas reduction it would actually achieve for us? Consider what are our priority projects, right? So what are the projects that are the equipment is going to be failing soon or might need to be replaced on a sooner timeline than some others. And then we were also able to look at the assessment within the context of other facilities assessments to think about what is the cost of electrification compared to a like-for-like replacement of a natural gas equipment, or compare solar energy costs to the actual designs that we are currently implementing. So the top level takeaway here is that we have, with this fuel transition assessment, we have a high level baseline understanding of what electrification projects, costs, and electrical needs are at different facilities. So now I'm going to jump into some of the findings of the assessment. So some of the top takeaways here are that the cost to transition city equipment from natural gas to electric is very significant. Our cost estimates from the fuel transition assessment are between $7 to $10.5 million to transition all equipment to electric. And about half of that cost is for the equipment itself, along with labor, and about half of that cost is for the electrical upgrades that are necessary. So you can think about, for the pool, there is not enough power there to actually put in the equipment that would then heat up that water. So we would need to do quite a significant electrical upgrade there to actually do this work. I also want to note these costs, although significant, are probably a little low. There's a lot of other factors coming into play, changes in cost of equipment in recent months. There's also, we would have to do additional analyses and structural analyses and engineering analysis and everything else to make sure that these projects are feasible, that they can be implemented, that they're not going to hinder the facilities and the operations of our facilities as well. So I do want to just be careful also that although this is a significant amount of money, it is likely an underestimate of how much this would cost. It does cover 70 pieces of unique equipment across those 23 buildings. So there's a lot of equipment here that we're considering to transition. Along with what the greenhouse gas inventory showed, the Julius Bone Pool, Public Works Campus, and the Community Center are our largest natural gas users. So those three facilities are the ones that we will need to address if we are going to really knock down our natural gas use at city facilities. And then the Community Center and City Hall are our two facilities that have to comply with Tier 2 of the statewide Clean Buildings Act. So that's just another level of considering what does energy use at those facilities look like. Based on the additional analysis that staff were able to do, we were able to look at projects through multiple different lenses. So one lens was, what are the projects at the facility level and at the equipment level that have a high impact on natural gas use compared to the cost of the work that they're doing. So we've identified a number of different projects, and I do want to note a number of those are leased facilities. So again, those are some of the facilities we have less control over, but there are also a number of facilities there that are owned and operated by the city that we get to really dig into for electrification. Additionally, as I mentioned, overall, the sites that have the largest impact are going to be the pool, public works, campus, and the community center. Next, for solar energy potential, we were able to look again across all of our city facilities to see what is our potential for solar energy generation across the city facilities. And our estimates are that we could put about 1.1 megawatts of solar generation capacity on our city facilities. And that would represent about 31% of all of our city current electrical use. And we also have to think about, as we're electrifying our equipment, our electric use increases. But as of right now, that would be about 31% of current electric use. Again, the cost of implementing that much solar is quite significant, $4.1 to $5.5 million. So what staff have been able to do is think about, what does prioritization of these projects look like? Where can we have higher investment to impact ratio, more cost-effective projects? Where do we have new roofs already so that we can prevent the situation of putting up solar panels and taking them off as we need to redo the roof and things like that? And one of the things that we've identified is that if we continue the amount of investment that the city is currently putting into solar energy projects in this biennium, we have a couple projects that we think we can accomplish. So specifically thinking about the Issaquah Senior Center, the Pickering Barn, both of which are current ongoing projects. And then also putting in solar energy at our public works campus. I did have a note here. If we were to increase the investment that we're putting into solar energy projects at the city level, I'm estimating we can probably include additional projects like solar at City Hall, at our parks and facilities shop, and at the Julius Bowman Pool as well. Some considerations for where we're thinking about putting in solar energy is that facility use and planning at city buildings is in flux, right? So we are making some changes at our facilities. We're thinking about future use of City Hall and general government. And so we want to be very careful about investing in facilities where the city is going to be at for a long time. And that way, again, don't have to kind of make changes very quickly after doing that. Additionally, state support for clean energy seems fairly secure right now. The Climate Commitment Act was preserved last year, but additional support, especially at the federal level, is uncertain. Additionally, renewable energy projects need to be coordinated very closely within facility limitations and with other facilities projects. So thinking about the structural limitations of our facilities, thinking about the existing and future electric use, and then also thinking about how we're coordinating with our utility and how their net metering and interconnection rules work. For EV charging, really the high level takeaways here are many of our facilities do have current electrical capacity for additional EV charging. But if we're thinking about the DC fast charging, we will have to do a lot of electrical upgrades. Additionally, we'll have to continue to think about, there's capacity for many of our buildings now, but if we're transitioning equipment to electric, that will take away some electrical capacity and so we might need electrical upgrades if we're planning to put in EV charging. Additionally, it's important to note that although electrification of natural gas equipment is a priority for us and for the city generally, there are many priorities around electric use at city facilities. IT is a great example of additional equipment that might go in that will use electricity. And so we do have to balance electrification of natural gas equipment with the other priorities on electric capacity at our facilities. So I'm going to next just kind of highlight a couple of some of the work that's been done with this assessment so far. And so the first piece here is just these are projects from the fuel transition assessment that have already been done, right? So these are projects that have been implemented, and the hope is that we'll actually get to see the impact of some of this on our 2024 greenhouse gas inventory, just some of these. But we've done work around HVAC and water heater replacements, on installing heat pumps. We've installed, I've mentioned before, we've installed 17 new EV chargers across multiple city facilities. Great, we're almost done. For current projects, we are currently working on a solar system at Pickering Barn and a solar and battery storage system at the Issaquah Senior Center. And the one other one I want to highlight is the community center. We're going to be in 2026, we have a funded project to replace the natural gas heating system there for heat pumps. And so, as I've mentioned before, that is one of our 3 top natural gas users at this facility, at the city. And so looking to electrify that building is going to have a significant dent in the city's natural gas use. And then all of these projects on the slide are incorporated into our capital improvement plan. So this was a lot of the work that we did over the last spring and summer. Is we worked very closely with our facilities team. We worked with our public works team. And we were able to enter in into our capital improvement plan projects ranging from water heater replacements up to electrification of the pool. I do want to note that although many of these projects are in the capital improvement plan, there does need to be a lot of work, additional work to identify further funding sources, conduct analyses to make sure that they're feasible and figure out how they're done, and then also figure out kind of how we're going to get electricity and all this other stuff. So a lot of work still needs to be done, but getting them into the capital improvement plan is a great first step. Timing and next step, we are currently working on project implementation, and we're going to continue working on project implementation. The other pieces on this slide are really just showing we have our budget coming up, the next budget process coming up next year. We're going to be working more projects into that. And then the year after that, we'll work on the CIP again, the capital improvement plan, and that cycle is going to continue. So we're going to continue to do these assessments. We're going to continue to implement projects. And every year we're going to be working these projects into our budgets and our capital improvement budgets. So the conclusions for this whole project and this whole work are that we've identified some near-term opportunities that can help us reach our near-term greenhouse gas reduction targets that we can implement here and now, and we are currently doing that. Additionally, major natural gas reduction is really costly, but it is necessary for us to reach our long-term greenhouse gas reduction targets. And so that is just going to require planning and effort to think long-term about. Additionally, this analysis, that's a base understanding, but there are a lot of other things that we'll need to consider to actually make sure that we can implement these projects successfully. So we've been able to take this, work these into our capital improvement plans, think about them in our work plans, and it's helped us understand what else do we need to know. And those are the avenues we're working with our facilities team to explore. Yeah. That's it for this presentation. That was quite a bit, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm happy to take questions.
So back in the day, solar water heating used to be a big thing. And then at that time, about 30, 40 years ago, it was way more efficient. You could buy a solar collector that heated water for a tenth or less than that of what it would take photovoltaic water. Of course, solar stuff got way cheaper. I don't know, is that still a thing? Is that part of something that has been analyzed for the pools? What I'm talking about. You need hot water, lots of hot water, and generating electricity, which you then use to heat the water, is probably going to cost more with the photovoltaic system that directs sunlight to warming the water. Is that under consideration at all?
Yeah, so solar hot water was not considered as part of this study. We do have one facility, Fire Station 72 had solar hot water panels, and our facilities team has not had great relationships with those panels. They keep breaking on us. For the pool specifically, I have not heard of solar hot water heated pools of the size that we have. We are looking to, Seattle is doing a lot of work around this to think about how they can decarbonize their pools. So we are leaning a lot on kind of the work that they're doing to think about electrification and reducing energy loss at that pool so that we can have smaller systems there.
Thank you.
So there are a few questions here. So the first one is, and I know you touched on this a little bit, the question of the whole decarbonization, electrification, and the additional electricity demand, right? So
Yeah.
Does the decarbonization estimate any consideration for if PAC or any other providers are actually able to provide or the increasing electricity demand? And is it just PAC or are you looking at additional providers or what is the consideration there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This assessment did not look at energy availability through PSC. Excuse me. Bellevue is looking at energy capacity in the future with PSC. So they're conducting an assessment that we're going to be looking very closely at to think about what is energy availability for us down the line. That is one of the things that could be a major barrier for some of these projects, right? Is if we say we've got all the money and we're ready to go, and if PSC says, hey, sorry, we don't have the money for you to electrify your pool or public works campus, or the energy for that, then that will be a hiccup for us. And so that is part of kind of those additional assessments, those long-term conversations, is talking with PSC about what we're planning to do and what we're hoping to do, and getting those conversations for electrical upgrades going early so that we can identify if there are any problems with that. The one other thing that I'll say is the renewable energy piece can help mitigate some of that energy demand. So if it's done, we're doing it right, you could put on some renewable energy on some sites and that can reduce the demand and potentially reduce the electrical upgrades necessary. So that's one other small consideration, but for the most part, especially when it comes to the pool or public works campus, for instance, it's not going to be, it's not going to make a huge difference in kind of those electrical upgrades necessary.
Right. So I would suggest not only because it will be a barrier, but I think the costs also can vary significantly based on what the availability of the electricity is.
Mhm.
So, that would be something you want to closely monitor or closely keep bringing it up. And the second point was, so you said the renewable energy, right?
Mhm.
I'm guessing you don't have any real estimates on how much of the renewable energy will be able to meet how much of the electricity demand, do you?
We, based on our assessment, we think if we were to install all of the renewable energy, we think we could. It would meet about 31% of our current electric demands. But then
Okay.
again, as we're electrifying, that electric demand will
Okay,
increase quite a bit.
so that's good to know. Then the other question was, do you have any successful solar energy projects in the works or, getting towards completion in the city of Issaquah already?
Yes, so before this year, the city's last successful solar energy project was at Fire Station 72, which was installed in 2011, I think. This year, we are in the very final process of contracting for a solar system at Pickering Barn. And then we're getting ready, and that's funded through a mix of city funds, grant funds, and then tax rebates from the federal government. And then we have another project, a solar and battery storage project at the Issaquah Senior Center, which is fully funded through the Washington State Department of Commerce. And we are getting ready to put that project out for proposals soon as well. And so that project will happen in 2026 for the most part.
So the fire station 72, which is, which was installed in 2011, you do have good data from that to see how much you are actually. What I'm getting at to my last question, because the costs are too high, I was wondering if this study involves any analysis of cost to benefit ratio in terms of when you will actually recoup the full money for decarbonization as well as the solar projects, because having that visibility and a clear, confident analysis of that will help you, actually proceed further, right?
Yes, so for the renewable energy piece, we did do payback analysis of, if a project costs between X amount and Y amount, what is the payback years, the estimated payback years, once we've implemented that project. A lot depends on those federal tax credits, and those were, many of them were cut as part of the bill this summer, the federal bill this summer, so that will impact things for sure. One of the things that we're still hoping on and we've seen success on is getting grants from the state government, which will help make those paybacks much shorter. And we're hoping, right, that say for the senior center project, right, all of the money that we're saving in avoided electrical costs get to go right back into our programming at that site. So that has been a part of the renewable energy analysis. The payback for the other equipment, we didn't quite do a payback analysis for that because most of that equipment doesn't pay for itself. But we did do analysis on kind of like what is the cost differential between like natural gas equipment and what are the best ratios of cost to impact, things like that.
Yeah, I think that would be good. And seems like, because of the changes in the bills or federal tax credits, this will be always kind of a moving target, which I can understand makes it really hard because, but at the same time, I think that it all boils down to actually how much is the cost and how you're going to sustain it, right? It's all about that. So yeah, I think you guys are doing good. Thank you.
All right. Any questions?
Has there ever been any studies on the pool as to its energy use through different months of the year? And have you ever considered shutting the pool down for, say, the winter months?
Yes, we review the energy use of the pool. We have had energy analyses done of the pool, kind of looking at how their energy use kind of looks over the year, over a day, things like that. We've considered opportunities, and what's not included in this is those energy efficiency measures. So one project that we're also actively working on right now is to implement pool covers at the pool, which would actually help save quite a lot of natural gas energy because it helps prevent the release of heat from the pool. So we are looking at those energy efficiency opportunities there as well. I cannot say that I've ever heard anybody talk about shutting the pool down over winter, and my guess is that there is still significant use of the pool throughout winter and swim team.
Yeah,
So
all the high school.
Yeah, it seems like a very thermally expensive
it is.
per capita place for the city to maintain. Sometimes we just need to consume less. And I've done some studies in my past on heating and ventilation systems for pools, and it just suck to heat.
Yes.
It's huge. Is it far greater than, say, the community center in consumption?
Yeah, so the pool represents about 50% of the natural gas use of the city.
That's
A little less,
That's a lot when you think about the number of people. To me, I feel like throwing chocolate bar in the pool, to shut it down, but, if you really want to save greenhouse gases, you could shut it down in the wintertime for say 3 or 4 months. And that's what people do when they have pools. A lot of people who have outdoor pools, they only use them in the summertime. So there you go. 50% is a lot.
I think it's
Per
49,
capita.
48%.
When you think about per capita usage, just
Any other comments, questions? Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump over to my next slide show. For this one, we are going to be going into some proposed updates, and I'm going to be talking about what some of those proposed updates are. For this presentation, I'm happy to take questions as we go if folks have questions about specific pieces of it, just so we can kind of dive a little deeper in.
Can I just
Yes, go for it.
Just wanted to briefly mention, Dawn said this in the intro, but we will eventually be taking action on this item. That was going to be a consideration for tonight if the board was ready to move forward. Given the smallish group, we think it's best probably to have the discussion, get your all's input. I will reach out to the board members that are not here, ask them to review the video, contact David if they have questions. We do really, we would really like to take action in our October meeting because that will keep us on track for council approval before the end of the year, which we're trying to wrap this up before the end of the year and transition in council. So that being said, please share your comments tonight, your feedback. We can meet with you one-on-one in between the meetings, but the hope is to take action on this next meeting if the board's ready to do so.
So this next presentation is to consider and look at proposed updates to the sustainable building and infrastructure policy at the city. So you might remember this did come to the board. Cascadia Consulting brought their draft recommendation to the board early this year. And they ended up taking the environmental board's recommendations, recommendations from the senior leadership team, putting together a report. And then based on that report, city staff were able to have created proposed updates to this policy. And I believe in the packet, you have both redlined version of the policy, a clean version of the policy, and maybe the old version of the policy as well. So hopefully that was not too confusing there. So some context about this policy. The existing sustainable building and infrastructure policy was adopted in 2004. So it's 21 years old at this point. And it was updating this policy was recommended in both the 2018 Sustainable Building Action Strategy, as well as called out as an action within the Climate Action Plan. And so we are trying to actually accomplish it at this time and put together a policy that we think will help us move forward with thinking about buildings and infrastructure. Buildings, as you saw in my previous presentation, are the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions in government operations, around 48% in 2022. And then, as I mentioned, in fall and spring, Cascadia Consulting develops recommendations for updating the building and infrastructure policy. So diving into those recommendations, the first recommendation was to pursue a phased approach to an updated policy. So this recommendation recognizes staff capacity, budgetary constraints, and the training necessary to really support incorporating sustainability practices into our work with city facilities, as well as our work with infrastructure. And one of the reasons around this as well is many of the cities and jurisdictions that have really robust building and infrastructure policies, sustainable building and infrastructure policies are much larger than the city of Issaquah. They might have dedicated staff members specifically to these types of policies, etc. So their first recommendation is a phased approach to implementation and to focus on some of those early wins that we can accomplish, to pilot projects and really try out the ways that we can incorporate these principles into projects. The second recommendation is to build staff and project capacity for implementation. Again, that's thinking about pilot projects, it's thinking about staff training, it's thinking about how can the sustainability team really support departments and staff across the city, so that we can incorporate these sustainability principles into projects across the city. And so the idea here is that from Cascadia was to build capacity over the next couple of years, evaluate, see how we're doing, and continue to try and build on that as we're going over the next 5 years. Before I dive too deep into the policy updates, one item that I want to just note is that the policy update is focused on municipal building and infrastructure projects. The original policy from 2004 talks about both municipal projects and community-wide projects. The idea with this policy update is to focus it on the city operations of our projects with buildings and our projects with infrastructure. So thinking parks, roads, pump stations, things like that, and really addressing the community-wide regulations and policies around sustainable building and infrastructure in our city code. So thinking that would be Title 18, Title 16, and a couple other areas there. So as you'll see, the proposed policy updates are really focused on what are we going to do at the city for these projects. So the first set of changes are to formalize sustainability team support for sustainable building and infrastructure projects across the city. That looks like supporting budget development, having sustainability have a seat at the table with departments across the city to incorporate and support the incorporation of sustainability principles and ideas into budgets, so that when projects come around, there is the budget to make these projects happen. As you saw in my previous presentation, for facilities electrification projects, very costly. And so planning ahead with that, with sustainability team support is going to be really crucial to think about how do we make sure that there's enough funds that we can implement these projects successfully. Additionally, sustainability identifies funding and support for staff training, thinking about as much as we like to support staff across departments, really diving deep into sustainability principles for infrastructure projects will require additional staff training for engineers and for the folks who are going to be out really leading these projects across the city. And then the final piece here is setting up an evaluation process and timeline for this policy. The goal here again is that we're not sitting here in 20 more years saying we have to update a policy for 2025, but we're actually actively looking at it and thinking about how is this policy working? What is it doing? What are our successes? What are our challenges? And how do we change this policy to support those changes? So the first set of changes again is around formalizing our sustainability team support for departments across the city.
That sustainability team is you two.
That sustainability team is us too. Yes, and then the idea is, you know, as support and training and everything grows across departments, hopefully, yeah, we could take a step back where possible. The second set of changes is related to sustainability guidance for new buildings and major retrofits. So this was a gap identified in the 2004 policy where it only really covered large facilities or medium to large facilities, and it actually recommended that projects get LEED Silver certification, which was is a little outdated with our city code. And so the new proposed changes identify what the requirements would be if the city tackles small facilities projects, which are identified as 5,000 square feet and under, medium projects, which are 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, and then large facility projects. On the small side, the focus is on encouraging sustainability principles in design and implementation. For medium projects, it's to align those projects with LEED Platinum, but not actually requiring certification. Instead, requiring that we document it internally and really keep an eye on incorporating those principles into the project. And the idea there is to allow a little bit of flexibility and reduce the costs associated with certification itself. And then for large facility projects, it aligns with our city code, which is currently LEED Platinum, and then to encourage going beyond that code where we can. And one note, again, I mentioned this in my previous conversation, we do have some facilities projects coming up. And so updating these changes, updating this policy now is likely we'll be able to test out how it's working in the next 5+ years as we tackle those larger facility projects. Yeah.
So David, couple of questions. So are any funding changes or the bill changes or anything, did it affect your sustainability policy support for the staff, basically?
And by bill changes like at the federal level?
Yeah, or is there any funding changes, has it affected, or you guys are just continuing to work as before? That was the question.
It's a great question. We, for the most part, are continuing as we were before. I think the uncertainty with funding at the federal level and kind of what that is going to be doing to state and local budgets has generated some careful thinking among city leadership for policies like this, trying to make sure that flexibility is built into these so that we can not lose sight of our climate goals, but also so that we can work really hard to do what we can within our budget constraints. And so, a good example of that is with medium facility projects. By not requiring certification for LEED, it does cut down on the project costs. But what we have here is that we still have to align with LEED Platinum, and we'll be documenting that internally, just not going through that certification process. So I would say the long answer is we're still forging ahead, but it is definitely a concern for departments and city leadership.
And you mentioned that there was phased implementation of the policy. So I just wanted to know at what means, has the phased implementation already started, and are any of the steps already implemented, or it's still, in future?
Yeah, so when we're talking about phased implementation, and you'll see a little bit of this later for some of the other topics, but part of what we're thinking about is, say, for facilities projects, we have kind of the separate buckets for small facilities, medium facilities, large facilities. And as we evaluate the use of this policy once it's implemented, if we don't find that, say, the no certification required for medium-sized facilities is working, that's when we might say, go back to council and say, look, this is not working. What we actually need to do is strengthen the policy here, or identifying other areas where we can strengthen and build out the policy in the next iteration as we're evaluating its use. So nothing in this new policy has been implemented yet, other than just kind of what staff are already doing. But the policy has not been adopted yet, so nothing has been phased in yet.
And so the sustainable purchasing policy you guys have in place or are working on, is it a part of this, or that's a completely separate thing?
It's a great question. The way I see it is that this policy is actually nestled under the sustainable purchasing policy. The sustainable purchasing policy is very broad, overarching, saying any city purchasing decision, we need to be considering sustainability, equity, and economics in those decisions. And the way I see it is this policy gets into more details around, well, what are we doing actually when it comes to facilities or infrastructure projects itself, or equipment change out projects. And so I see this policy leaning on the sustainable purchasing policy as additional support for why decisions are going to be made.
So the thing I was getting at is, see, this is a long-term process,
Yes.
But, and I understand the phased implementation, I understand the burdens and the uncertainty and everything. What I was getting at is some of the especially sustainable purchasing policy materials or items should be a no-brainer that this needs to switch to this. And have you guys started working on that, or is there any progress on those kinds of things, which would be a simple swap, which doesn't have to wait for 10 years to, come into effect?
Yes. So the sustainable purchasing policy covers everything from paper to new facilities, right? It does not specifically call out items that must go from A to B. But through use of that policy, we are doing things like thinking about some of those easy win switches, right? Like compostable events, serviceware and things like that. We are thinking about how we can have formalize this as well, but we're trying to do it where we can. Purchasing, reviewing electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles before other vehicles, right? So there are those somewhat simpler choices that can be made, and generally, I would say for this policy, it's thinking about more complex projects themselves. So new buildings as a whole, or full infrastructure projects like a park, retrofit project, or a new street, project or something like that.
Okay.
Does that help answer the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, John.
It seems like this policy, when I sit here, it seems like it's geared primarily for structures and buildings.
Mhm.
Will the policy also cover property and grounds? For example, like canopy and wetlands and permeability of surfaces, things like that, like not just creation of greenhouse gases, but preserving canopy, for example, or like permeability. Like I've heard people talking about putting astroturf fields, things like that. Is that part of the policy too?
It is, and we'll be getting to the infrastructure side in a minute, but I will say for the facilities, when we think about LEED sustainability principles that would be going into it, there are sections of LEED that are specifically focused on the building energy use, for instance, but there are also sections around the building envelope, the building grounds, where you're placing buildings, permeable surface, things like that. And so
It's covered in the policy.
it's covered in kind of how LEED works generally, is it kind of looks holistically around the whole construction project. And then as you'll see in a little bit, the infrastructure projects will be using a tool called Envision, and that specifically, Don might have been trained in that. But that specifically looks at principles that you're talking about as it relates to the non-building type projects.
And city facilities and infrastructure do need to comply with city code as well. So some of those items you were mentioning would probably be covered in city code, but this would help fill the gap or take it beyond city.
Okay.
So the next change is very specific to facilities for the most part. And this change is modeled after the Pierce County Electric First policy. It's actually a small part of the policy, but really what it is saying is that if we're ever replacing fossil fuel equipment in our facilities, we have to at least assess the feasibility of electrification of that equipment. So what that is really saying is taking the fuel transition assessment, going a little bit deeper than that and saying, hey, we're going to be replacing a pool water heater, or we're going to be replacing a HVAC system in a building. Before we make any decisions around whether or not we're going to replace it, with natural gas, we must look at whether or not, or what it would look like to electrify. So this is modeled after that policy and is really just put in place to provide a little bit of a kick to require looking at electric feasibility before replacing fossil fuel equipment with more fossil fuel equipment. Here's where we get to the infrastructure type projects. And so our previous policy didn't have as much information around infrastructure projects. It was a big gap. And so this is an area where kind of you can see the phased in approach, right? So we've set, as part of the proposed changes, Envision as the standard for sustainable infrastructure projects. We looked at a couple of different of these evaluation tools, and Envision is one that is like LEED. It's a certification that you can get that covers sustainability principles for infrastructure projects, and it's used nationally. King County has its own homegrown sustainable infrastructure scorecard, but we felt like the Envision standard provided a little bit more, it was a little bit easier for us to use. It had this national support, whereas the King County scorecard has specific staff members dedicated to it at King County, and so therefore it doesn't quite have the support that this national standard has. So we've incorporated references to Envision as that standard for sustainable infrastructure projects. And we've required, as part of this policy, a pilot project using Envision by the end of 2027. So that would require working with our parks team or with our public works team for the most part to identify which project we can really test this, this standard on, this certification on, see how it works, work closely with those staff to try and figure out how will this apply for that project, and how are we going to try and apply it for other projects. Additionally, I'm going to mention this is another area where staff training comes into play. As I mentioned, I know many folks at Bellevue were trained on the Envision toolkit and the standard. And so staff training on Envision and other sustainable infrastructure best practices are going to be really key here as we think about making sure that our public works team, our parks team, and other staff across the city understand how these certifications work and understand how to incorporate these sustainable infrastructure best practices into their work.
What is Envision? Is it a software tool or?
Now, so are you familiar with LEED for buildings?
No.
So LEED, looking at the building and how you build the building, using sustainable products, using sustainable energy, like we're talking about, how you site it, how you let, impervious versus pervious surfaces, how you site those, keeping right trees and stuff. Envision kind of takes one step farther out on that and looks at how you actually manage the entire project from start to finish. So
Okay, so it's like a set of policies or?
no, it's just kind of like looking from all the way from when you're even thinking about what property to purchase. Are you going to purchase a brownlands versus a native area to build your building on?
Okay.
Or if you have a property that has some native area on it that's nice, how do you work your facility in so you avoid impacts to that? It takes one step back, and it's not as technical as the LEED process. It's not the LEED process done by the architect firms typically, where the Envision processes can be done by, we had 50, 60 staff members that went through it. But everybody speaks the same language when we hear about projects on it.
Okay.
And as you guys said, it's a great training tool. And then, you can kind of direct everybody across the city to think this route when you're building it.
Okay. So it's a process.
Yeah.
And the way LEED and Envision work is you can certify a project through LEED or Envision.
Okay.
And the way that'll work, right, is you'll get the simple way to explain it will be like there's sections, right? So that you can get points in, and if you get a certain amount of points, you're a certified Envision project or you're a certified LEED project. And the way you get those points is by incorporating different types of sustainability principles into that project. Again, looking at water use, permeable surface, what property you're buying, and how you're putting multimodal transit around it. All of these pieces kind of come together. And so importantly, compared to the fuel transition assessment, both Envision and LEAD are much more holistic beyond just energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, but thinking about our natural systems, how are our projects good, creating as minimal impact or positive impacts as possible on our natural systems, how it's helping the broader community, and the health and well-being of our community, things like that. So there's a lot of pieces that go into these certification tools, and they're tools and processes to help guide staff thinking as
And they're used nationwide.
Yeah,
both
it's a-
are used nationwide.
it's a national database for both LEAD and Envision, where you can put projects in and, get celebrated on this.
Okay.
database. You'll often see it a lot of times you're walking around on new buildings, you'll see a little LEAD certification plaque out on the front. They've gone through the process.
It is fun. You can kind of keep an eye
So
on.
I can Google this and learn more.
Yes.
Yeah. LEED is the biggest one, probably, especially for buildings. There are other certification systems for buildings and especially for different types of buildings, like Built Green for residential facilities, things like that. There are many fewer of these certification systems for infrastructure projects, and that was kind of part of the challenge, is that it is a newer field versus, the facilities certification projects, which have been around for a very long time.
I'll send out some links for both LEAD and Envision. If folks aren't familiar.
The final policy changes here are related to waste diversion practices. So we felt like, while we're updating this policy, we might as well, and we definitely want to increase our ability to manage our waste in as responsible a manner as we can. So these were policy changes suggested by and advocated for by Sam Tarbin, our solid waste analyst. And these are really set around setting diversion goals for construction and demolition projects across that the city does, establishing waste audit timelines for all city facilities. So looking at what waste is being produced at those facilities and how can we improve diversion rates at those facilities where possible. And then mandating waste reduction and source separation of solid waste in city facilities. So again, that's looking at reducing the overall waste that we're producing in city facilities and also separating it out into recycling, compost, and garbage as well. So those have also been worked in, and we're trying to build throughout this whole update process a little bit more of a holistic policy that addresses waste, infrastructure, city facilities, equipment changeouts, et cetera. So kind of working it all into one cohesive policy.
Your waste diversion practices would apply to existing maintenance practices as well as when you redevelop.
Correct. Yes. Exactly. So this would go into play for all city facilities right away. Most of the facilities policies are related to when we're doing major changes to facilities or building new facilities. Not all of them, but most of them. But this would again be all facilities right away. So the conclusion I have here, these are changes that we're proposing. I'm open to feedback and excited to kind of hear what the environmental board thinks about this. One note I do want to mention, and to John's point, because this is looking beyond just energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, thinking about evaluating a policy like this is quite difficult, because what we're looking at is how are we incorporating sustainability principles holistically into projects, right? That impact our natural system, our community well-being, our energy use, water use, all of these different pieces, and thinking about it for very varied projects. Everything from a dog park type park project up to a new city building, right? And so I do want to just note that the evaluation of this policy, it is built into the policy itself, but it is just a kind of a difficult task to tackle, and one that we're really excited to be doing as we move forward. So I have a couple questions for discussion. First, I'm happy to take any general questions about the proposed updates and changes. Second, do you have any does the environmental board have any feedback on the proposed changes? And then finally, are there anything, additional changes that are not included in the policy that you'd like to see us explore?
Well, so in the last section there, you talk about waste diversion, but you didn't enumerate what specific changes you're proposing for the waste diversion. So I don't know, I can't comment on whether you're going far enough with that or not. Is that within scope to talk about now?
Yeah, let me pull it up so I get my numbers right. I have to find the specific section.
Share that as we get into the discussion.
Yes, I can share this. So you can see me scroll. Sorry. There we go. Okay, got it. A little bit later. Here we go. So this section is just about minimizing single-use plastics, disposable utensils, and mandating that source separation. The audits, and the goal of the audits is to achieve 70% city waste diversion by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And so those are the audits that would happen at city facilities every 3 years or on a rotating basis. So the audits would happen every year, but for each facility every 3 years. And then the aim would be a 90% waste diversion rate for construction involving demolition and 75% waste diversion for construction not involving demolition. And though that's an encouraged aim, and so that's again kind of where a phased approach would happen of this is the encouraged diversion rate, and as we are assessing how this is being implemented, we can make that stronger as that language stronger in future updates.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about this particularly now because there's a house under construction on my lane. And they have a nice big bin out front and they're throwing amazing quantities of nice lumber in there. And I'm just wondering, well, what happens to all that? In the olden days, it would have all gone to the landfill. What happens these days with things like that?
That is a great question. I might need to follow up with our solid waste analyst to get more details to make sure I'm giving the best answer there.
Because it has, for example, it looks like they're just mixing everything into this bin. They ought to be separating out dimension lumber, which is nice clean lumber, versus garbage, versus well-engineered lumber, plywood and things like that have chemicals in it. That's in a different category than dimension lumber, which is wood, and should not go directly into a landfill. The uses for that, right? It should be repulped and made into other things. So I'm wondering what happens these days to a bin like that.
I can find out more details. What's currently in the policy is the aim for essentially 90% of that material would go towards reuse instead of the landfill. So
For city
for city
projects.
projects, sorry, for city
Yeah.
projects, yes.
Our city code does have some requirements. We'll look that up and send it. And then that is proposed in the new ICAP as we get into the waste and materials review of those new actions. There will be a proposal to update that code and make it stronger.
Okay, thank you.
Just an idea along the lines, the city could do something to foster reuse and repurposing of city equipment that's no longer used. At Boeing, they used to have a place where they would take all the old desks and all the old computers, and then they would open this store up like once a week on Saturday for sale to the public. the city could do something similar like that.
Does the city use a public surplus process?
Oh, that's a great question. I know the school district does something like that.
I think that what I'm aware, municipalities and government agencies are required to surplus their excess stuff. There's lots of government surplus websites out there.
Okay.
But they're required to try to recoup any available money they can before they dispose of it.
So it's already done.
Everybody does a little different, so.
We definitely do follow some public surplus. I'm most familiar with it with our fleet. So, you know, if we're getting rid of a old car, we have to kind of go through these policies. We can't just, you know, throw it out or anything. But I know we have had events at Pickering Barn specifically for kind of material, you know, kind of furniture, blanking on the word, but furniture recycling events and things like that. I think, I'm not sure if city materials would have gone into that necessarily, but there are a couple specific actions in our ICAP that we're considering and some of our other plans to specifically look at kind of opportunities for reusing, recycling city equipment and materials in our facilities.
One suggestion for you on the
Yeah.
phased approach from 25 to 2030. It doesn't really say what happens after the phased approach. So put a little more teeth to that of 2028, we're going to go through an in-depth evaluation and make a decision by 2030 on final steps.
Right.
You put the timeline to it, but
What kind of?
it's just kind of open and
Yeah.
it's just kind of, okay, now what?
Yeah.
After 2030.
Okay. Yes, I think we can do that.
Overall, I like it. I think it looks good. Other questions, comments?
Actually, I have one.
Yeah.
I'll give it a try. So, so you mentioned one of the policy changes is to change it from, or at least to eliminate the language that talks about community-facing events. And you mentioned, and I think in another part of the language, it changes it from, all private, public or municipal buildings to those that are just owned and financed by the city.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that was part of sort of like the city wanting to lead by example. Were there other challenges, or was it too ambitious of a goal to sort of, what were the challenges of this initial community-facing approach? And can you speak a little bit about that? Why the change?
Yeah, from kind of community and city to city for this
Yeah.
policy. So I think a lot of the impetus for that was to think about where we can implement those sustainability guidance or regulations the best in city processes. And so I think with the update of our Title 18, we incorporated sustainability principles into that. And then within our, actually quite a few different city code areas. So Title 18 is our land use code, 16 is our building code. Then we have, and I mess up the numbers, but 12 or 13, there's information on stormwater, and some of these other pieces. And so rather than having these community regulations around sustainability, both in our code, but then also in this policy, the idea is to just incorporate it as much as we can into the code itself. So that's then the guidance and the requirements for folks. And instead, take this policy for city operations to think about what can the city do to go above and beyond what's already existing in those codes. So it's very possible that we come back to the environmental board in the future to talk about updates to our city code to incorporate more sustainability language into those pieces of the Issaquah Municipal Code that would be then more applicable to the community beyond, again, what's already in there right now. So
No, that's actually on my updates for later, is we will be reviewing. So when Title 18, our land use code was passed, the environmental board weighed in on the sustainable building requirements there. we went with a LEED Platinum certification for buildings of a certain size and above. We always knew we would revisit that. So that is on the list for 2026 to revisit what are going to be the community-wide requirements, sustainable building requirements. So yeah, as David was saying, we really want community-wide requirements documented in code. This document is really meant to be internal policy, a lot of guidelines, some requirements, but it'll be a little bit more flexible versus what's in code and required by any community.
And I will say that the city is required to meet the code as well. So even if this policy allows a little bit of flexibility, anything that's in code, the city has to do also.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much for listening to
Thank
me blabber on for the last hour and a half.
Please do look at, and it's attachment C is the track changes version of, David kindly pulled out the material from the larger document into a more readable format. But that's where we seek any additional input revisions, reach out, schedule one time if you want more time to talk about it, and we'll offer that up to the board members that aren't here so we can come back for a final discussion and make the decision.
Okay. Yeah, Stacy?
All right, we will give David a break. So I will, we're about 7:55. We'll keep this fairly brief. We're going to provide an update on the climate action plan update. Provide a few report out at the end of the meeting. We shared a bit about this at the last couple of meetings, but did want to provide the board just a progress report on where we are with updating the plan. And I'll pull up a couple documents in a few moments. So as you all are aware, many of you participated. We formed 2 committees last spring that were focused around 2 of our focus areas in the plan. One committee on natural systems and water resources, the other on transportation and land use. Those committees met together and then separately to really dive in deep into the actions in those focus areas. Just as a reminder to the reason we formed those 2 committees was our natural systems section need a lot of updates because the current actions in the ICAP do not relate to the target for that focus area, which is around tree canopy, land use and transportation. A lot of those actions in the current climate plan were focused on the Title 18 update. Many of them were addressed in that land use code update. And then we've also updated our mobility action plan since the ICAP was written. So we wanted to revisit the transportation action. So those committees have met, provided recommendations over the summer. We worked with a consultant and then staff have been evaluating those recommendations to put forward either a revised action, a new action, or recommendation to action from the plan. We are planning to bring that input to multiple boards and commissions this fall, as well as the environmental board to get feedback on those proposed revisions and eventually work through the environmental board to approve those actions into the new climate plan. As well this summer, David and I have been going through the plan and looking at the actions in the other focus areas. So buildings and energy, the overarching materials and resources. And we have been working on revisions with staff, subject matter experts, our own thoughts based on what we've learned over the last few years. Looking at our neighboring jurisdictions who are updating their climate plans to see if they have great ideas for new policies to propose. And we will be packaging those recommendations up to bring to you all over the coming months. We'll also be meeting with our emergency manager. He's back from leave in November to work on the community resilience and well-being section and provide new recommendations for that section. Earlier this week, David and I also met with staff from the Snoqualmie tribe to start our review of the natural systems actions. She was only able to attend one of the committee meetings, so we were going through recommendations coming out of the committee as well as our staff review to get her input, and we'll continue that conversation with the tribe to look at additional. So that is kind of where we are. Things are going to get very busy soon as we start to take draft recommendations to Transportation Board. It'll be a combined meeting with Equity Board, Park Board, and PPC. And in the meantime, we'll be starting to have conversations with you all about some of the more overarching questions, like how long should this plan be? How often should we be doing our greenhouse gas inventory? And there's a few other kind of overarching questions that we'll start to have. So that was a very quick overview. I will show you just what we put in the memo. This is a very tentative plan of what we're thinking is talking with you in October, starting that conversation about some of the overarching updates we're looking at making, talking about how long we want this plan to be greenhouse gas inventory. And then October, December, we'd be starting to bring specific actions to you, probably grouped by focus area, so buildings and energy or natural systems and water resources. We will bring you the actions after they've been reviewed with the other board or commission that is the subject matter expert around that particular topic. The one thing I neglected to mention that's also coming up is we will be forming a third committee, metrics committee, which I know Raj has volunteered to. We're going to reach out to Jamie. He'd originally expressed interest, and we welcome any other members of the board. That group will be starting to meet this winter once we've started to shape our actions a little bit more and identify really what are the best measures for those actions to make sure we can continue to report out in a very transparent way on our dashboard. So that group will meet kind of winter into early spring, sort of in parallel as we're finalizing actions. We're thinking probably November, we should be ready to bring you all natural systems actions, some of the overarching actions, which really are municipal work, and maybe even some of the buildings and energy action. That might be very ambitious for that meeting. December, we should be ready to bring you community resilience and well-being. And then January through April, we'll probably bring you the focus area actions again, starting to talk metrics, and really starting to get more of a complete review over the plan revisions. We are still aiming for council review and approval by June. Reminder, that is to get ahead of our budget season, which staff usually propose budget requests in July. If we need to extend this deadline because the environmental board has more feedback on the plan, or we just need more of a process, that's definitely doable. But our hope was to get the plan approved for the budget adoption. Any questions on schedule and very tentative schedule? And then what I did want to show is just how we're planning to bring you materials for review. Before I do that, any questions on?
No, I will just remind everybody that council review or the council reviewed April, June ahead of the budget. That was one of our earlier comments from long ago. Ms. firms came to us was to please align that with the budget so that you get this ahead in case you need it.
So Stacy, just one question and just remind me, I don't remember. So this is, so if it gets approved in June, this is a 5-year plan, right?
That's what we'll talk about next meeting. Yeah, I think there's options. We had some great feedback from the Snoqualmie tribe this week that kind of reshaped my thinking around timeline, but that's a recommendation the board can make. So we are shaping the action so they could really exist in a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. They're still relevant. So that'll be a lens. Yeah, great question and look forward to that conversation.
And the current plan is a 5-year.
Yeah. and then
That's the update.
Yeah. Our light refresh update. Great. So what I wanted to just share, and these were in the packet, these were not for review, not for discussion, just a example. We are planning to bring you all the items for review in a format following the very extensive comprehensive plan review. We felt like that format and opportunity for the board to review items seemed to work. So this is an example of kind of overarching comments and where we'd eventually move all the recommendations for action revisions would be into a document like this. We'd kind of show it by section of the plan. We'd show what the proposed change is, whether or not that proposed change was addressed and why. And then what we're working on for the committee review is somewhat similar, although it'll be a little bit different because we want you to understand the input from the committees. Is we'd have the current action in the plan, feedback, any proposed revisions to that action based on committee input. We will show you a little bit of what that committee discussed that led to the proposed action, what our recommendation is and why, whether we're simplifying what the committee suggests, suggesting we move forward with it, suggesting a different approach. We provide you that detail. So there will really be these two documents. One is kind of all the actions addressed by the two committees. Once those actions, the board has reviewed them, kind of provided feedback, we'd eventually move those into this kind of main document that'll capture all the changes going into the plan. But for right now, we felt like we kind of needed the two document given the committee approach. So that might have been hopefully not too confusing, but basically wanted to give you a snapshot of how we plan to bring the changes to you. And again, it's really following that model that Stephen used for the comprehensive. Welcome feedback on this. If there's other ways, we can also share as requested our track changes version of the ICAP, which will become very, very messy, very fast. But yeah, welcome any feedback on kind of this format, or if there's other things you want to see as we're bringing you materials.
Could you include a date you received?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we can kind of see it as a timeline.
Yep.
Any plans to replace the environmental board with an AI bot?
No.
That day will come.
No, I mean, I think
funding to do.
discussion, human interaction, that's pretty critical.
For the moment.
For the moment. Great. Any other thoughts, feedback? Yeah, as we do a first review in October and then November, if there's things like date that you want to see in here, let us know. We can build these out further. Just want to make sure you're prepared for what you'd be receiving over many, many meetings. Great. I think that is all you're going to share.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
At one time you had something on your agenda for tonight regarding Sister City.
Yes, we'll do a quick update on that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's it on the ICAP update. Any other questions on where that process is?
Oh, sounds like we'll get to see it several times.
Let me do my other quick updates. Okay, maybe before I move forward, Karen, Nina, if you're still there, I think it's probably very late. Any updates from you all? Before
No, I don't have anything.
Great. Excellent. Well, yeah, next topic, good segue, John. Wanted to provide an update on conversations with our sister city in Morocco. If you all recall, back in April, I believe, the mayor joined us and we had a short joint meeting with the Sister Cities Commission to talk about a potential joint project related to climate resilience with our sister city, Chefchaouen. Since then, staff have been participating in an international cohort that partners U.S. cities and African cities to work on climate resilience projects that integrate art, heritage, and culture. And we have been participating in that cohort through trainings, resources. That group is also facilitating conversations between the U.S. and African cities. We've had one conversation with Chefchaouen to date that included the mayor and some staff just to hear what their priorities for a joint project would be. We've heard from Mayor Polly a couple of times. She has some priorities around showing projects that demonstrate climate action in different types of environments, dry and hot and wet. And then last week, we met with Don and Alex and the chairs of the Sister City Commission and chairs of the Art Commission to provide an update on conversations to date and start to brainstorm potential project ideas or goals for a project. I think there is a lot, what we've heard to date is there's a lot of interest on centering around youth. And probably some type of multimedia art project. And there were some really specific ideas. Don had some great ideas about working closely with schools. We had ideas about focusing on mental health and really building hope and empowerment amongst youth in a climate change future. So our next steps for the project are connecting again with our sister cities just to share our conversations to date, connecting with some of our youth advisory boards, sustainability ambassadors, Karen, Mina, probably connecting with you and other youth representatives on Sister Cities Commission and the Arts Board to receive input, and then hopefully having a project concept developed by this winter that could then be implemented in the spring. So just moving forward, nothing concrete yet, but a lot of ideas and interest, and we know that Chefchaouen's committed to moving. So as we have those conversations with youth and start to shape more of a project idea, we can bring that back to the data.
There's a lot of conversation about a shared approach where the youth would be learning about the other city while at the same time developing some kind of artwork. Either they develop artwork their location that they share with us, or they learn about our location and develop artwork, what they think our location is. Same thing, so.
Yeah,
That's
actually, yeah,
cool
that
project.
is great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and getting involved, youth involved with that, I think is the best way to go about it.
I was interested because my daughter just went there.
Oh, really?
So just for a couple days.
We also did our sister city liaison is interested in maybe talking about bringing in the sister city in Norway, possibly into the project as well. Not to complicate things, but if there is shared interest there, it'd be great to bring in. Great, and then I have 2 quick council updates and a couple reminders for that. Last night, there was a discussion on tree code at one of our council committees. I know Anne was aware of this, and some of you may have been following it. I will note there was an email from Connie last night regarding this, so Minnie was going to follow today just to resolve or better understand what the concern was. In conversations with Minnie today, she did confirm that all the staff recommendations that went to the council committee were in line with the environmental board recommendations. The committee did end up recommending moving forward with the code. There was a lot of discussion during the meeting, whether to send it back, whether to send parts of it forward. In the end, they thought it was best to move it forward at this time in its current state, but they have asked staff to come back for kind of a phase 2 and really revisit the tree code. Minnie shared that and we've heard from Dan Hintz here that there is going to be the King County tree canopy study happening. And so Minnie and her team think there'll be results out of that can be really used to inform a next phase of the tree code, as well as some tools that will help better assess the tree equity at the parcel level. So expect in 2026, we will be revisiting tree code. I know that was a very lengthy topic that we revisited several times this spring and early summer, but it's a really important one in the city. So it'll be critical for the environmental board to weigh in again on any updates to that. On Monday at Committee of the Whole with Council, they did discuss the Title 18 whiteboard. If folks remember that, for those that weren't on the board a couple of years ago, when we went through the big Title 18 land use code update, there were several things that either didn't get addressed or were included with the note that we needed to revise them, such as the sustainable building and green building policy. So council discussed those priorities for our planning department to look at. And it's very likely next year, in addition to tree code, we'll be revisiting the green building policy with the opportunity to expand beyond leaf platinum. So there'll be a great opportunity for the board to weigh in on that. And then Minnie did mention there's the potential we'll be getting into wildfire risk and critical area discussions, which the board would likely be weighing in on. So shaping up to possibly be a very busy 2026 looking at codes and policy. Any question on those two big council updates? All right. And then last thing, our next meeting in October, we'll be bringing back sustainable building and infrastructure policy for potential action, and then starting conversation on plan update. And then as a reminder, I think you all have on your calendar, October 15th, we are planning a town hall event at the King County Library. We will be sending out a flyer on that probably early next week. We're confirming one of the partners whether they'll be speaking. So we'll make sure that you all have that invitation and can spread the word with your networks on that event.
Is this the one for the climate action or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you still need any help with that?
That I have you down to volunteer possibly to help
Okay.
out. So, yeah.
Especially for planning purposes, if you need any help, definitely.
Okay, that sounds great.
There's more than, was it 6 of us at that? Does it have to be?
I'll probably note it as a special meeting because we really like all of you there. It's a town hall with the mayor to talk about our progress on climate and sustainability, as well as hear from other partners. And then we'll be there to get some input on some aspect of the climate plan. We haven't figured that out yet, but yeah, we would really like the full board there. So we'll plan to mark it as a special meeting. That's it. Any other big? Tree giveaway.
Yeah, so our tree giveaway program is launching. The application's open on next Friday, the 19th September. We are doing kind of a slow roll of announcement and focusing our outreach immediately on areas that have lower tree canopy cover in the city first. So all that's to say, you might start seeing some lawn signs go up. You might start seeing flyers at some community facilities. We have around 275 to 300 trees that we'll be giving away. So if you're interested, it will be open to any resident of Issaquah small business located in Issaquah, nonprofit located in Issaquah, et cetera. Starting September 19th, and information's already on the website. So we don't know how quick the trees are gonna go. This is our first time ever doing it, so we will.
Where did you
Find
get the
out.
trees?
25 of them were, I think Ann Newcomb saved them, rescued them. Those were Douglas firs. The rest of the trees, I have to look back at which nursery we got them from, but
So they're potted up?
yes, so I think the smallest trees are in like 2-gallon buckets, but it's like 2 to 5 gallon bucket trees. And there's about 10 different types of trees that we're giving away. Community members can take up to 2 trees. Again, like nonprofits, things like that can take up to 10 trees, sign up for up to 10 trees. So, and then the actual giveaway event will be in November, but there's an application process first so that we can figure out how many of each trees we're getting and order them and prepare for the event.
So just a spin on this. I was mentioning this earlier. I tend to save volunteer trees and then pot them up and then grow them up. That's something we could do in the community as a feeder to something like this, where people could, they see a tree sprouting up in their, in their ditch or whatever, they dig it out, pot it up and nurse it for a year and then bring it to one of these events.
Or if there was a place they could just pot it up and drop it off.
Yeah.
Like a nursery type facility, if the Parks Department comes by and takes care of it and so on.
It's where with water.
Could definitely be something we talk about with Dan and explore.
We'll send out a link to the
Yes,
page
we
for
can
this
send
giveaway.
out something to that. So I hope you get a tree if you're looking to plant in your yard, and otherwise spread the word with folks, especially in Issaquah Highlands, downtown Issaquah, central Issaquah, South Cove. Yeah.
Thank you. And it? All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Tina.